I saw it there, silent, gleaming, when she was already gone. Different perfume, different smile. And yet, I said nothing. I made her coffee. I kissed her cheek. I let her lies sit between us like a fog I refused to see. But I was watching, tracking the way her stories tangled. Her footsteps fell too light. I was listening to the silences, the ones thick with something unspoken. She thought I wouldn't notice. She thought she could leave her secrets behind, just like that ring. But I noticed. I always noticed. Let me take you back to the quiet unraveling of everything we built. I noticed it the morning after she claimed she had an early meeting downtown. It lay there, barely catching the light as the sun pressed against the frosted kitchen window. I remember thinking, almost absurdly, that maybe she'd forgotten it while rinsing off the coffee mugs. But I didn't touch it. I left it there, a small, gleaming lie waiting for her return. Back then, things were simple. Or maybe I just told myself they were. I'd built a routine around Scarlett, one that felt as solid as the old oak dining table we'd shared since our early years. Wake up, brew coffee, check the news. Drive to work, a firm handshake here, a client call there, and then back home. We used to laugh at how predictable we were. She'd put on her music while she prepped dinner, humming tunelessly. I'd stand by the doorway, watching her, sipping a beer, offering a quiet, smells great. And yet, even then, small fissures ran through our life, unnoticed. Like the way she started checking her phone more often during dinner. The way she'd absent-mindedly let the wine flow on weeknights, something she used to avoid. Or the times I'd wake at 3 a.m., and she'd be downstairs, lights low, her laptop's glow painting her face. Couldn't sleep, she'd murmur, not looking up. But I dismissed it. Told myself she was stressed. Told myself it would pass. It was late August, the air heavy with the promise of storms. We were nearing our 25th anniversary. I'd started making plans. A weekend getaway, just the two of us, the way it had been before Willow was born. Scarlett always loved the coast. I thought I'd surprise her with a rental near the cliffs, a place where we could sit with a bottle of wine and watch the ocean cut against the rocks. I imagined us reconnecting, maybe laughing at the past, maybe even letting go of whatever silent distance had crept between us. I left the office early that day. Traffic was mercifully light, and I found myself whistling an old tune as I turned into our street. The house, with its white shutters and the slight sag in the porch step, felt reassuringly familiar. Inside, the usual quiet greeted me. The faint scent of Scarlett's perfume lingered, a hint of lavender and something sharper, maybe citrus. She wasn't home. A note on the counter read, "Ran out to meet Elaine for coffee. Back later. S." Elaine. The name sat oddly with me. Scarlett mentioned her now and then, an old co-worker from her nonprofit days. But I couldn't recall the last time I'd heard her say she was meeting her. I poured myself a drink and stood by the window, watching the wind stir the branches of the old maple in our yard. The neighbor across the street, Mrs. Kearns, was out watering her roses. She gave me a wave, which I returned absently. Mrs. Kearns liked to talk. She was one of those people who always had a story, a snippet of gossip to share. That evening, as Scarlett breezed back in, she was a little breathless, her cheeks flushed. She kissed my cheek lightly and said, "Elaine sends her love." I wanted to ask more, what they'd talked about, where they'd gone, but I hesitated. Instead, I just nodded and asked if she was hungry. Later, as we sat side by side on the couch watching something neither of us really cared about, she leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture that should have felt close. But her presence felt distant, like she was leaning into the idea of us rather than the reality. I thought about the ring again. The next morning, I woke to the soft clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Scarlett was humming softly, the tune unfamiliar, her back turned to me as she loaded the dishwasher. I stepped into the doorway, coffee mug in hand, and watched her for a moment. The sunlight caught in her hair, and I thought about the small gap between us, how it had grown quietly, almost imperceptibly. "Scarlett," I said, my voice low, "where were you really yesterday?" She froze, just for a fraction of a second, before continuing to stack the plates. "I told you. Elaine and I went for coffee." I nodded slowly, the lies settling between us like a thread pulled too tight. I didn't push. Not yet. But as she turned and gave me a smile, too quick, too practiced, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The ring was still in the sink. And for the first time in a long time, I wondered what else she might have left behind. A few days after I saw her ring in the sink, Scarlett's phone habits changed. It was subtle at first. During dinner, she'd place her phone face down on the table. If it vibrated, she'd glance at it, press a button to silence it, and then offer a tight smile. When I asked what it was, she'd wave it off, just the board sending updates about the gala, and change the subject. I told myself it was nothing, just stress. She always got tense before big events, and the gala was coming up. But then there were other shifts. She started wearing a heavier perfume, something musky and unfamiliar. When I commented on it, she gave a vague answer. Picked it up on a whim. Thought you'd like it. She left for the gym earlier, stayed later. Said she was catching extra classes, though her workout clothes stayed folded in the basket. I didn't push. After 25 years, I figured a little distance was normal. But one evening, I came home early and found her in the study. Papers spread across the desk, laptop open. She looked up, startled, and shut the laptop a little too quickly. Hey, she said, her voice too bright. You're home early. Meeting's wrapped up, I said, walking closer. What are you working on? Oh, just some charity stuff. Boring paperwork, she said, gathering the papers and tucking them into a folder. I caught a glimpse of a logo, Avenue Cafe, before she slid it away. It wasn't a name I recognized. I meant to ask, but she changed the subject, suggesting takeout. I let it go. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling while she slept beside me. I told myself it was stress, a busy schedule, the weight of upcoming plans. But there was a distance now, not just in her explanations, but in how she turned away when I tried to meet her eyes, how her silences stretched just a little longer than they used to. Sunday morning, I suggested we drive out to the farmer's market, something we used to do when Willow was younger. Scarlett hesitated, then said, I've got errands. Rain check. She left in a hurry, her bag slung over her shoulder, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. I spent the morning trimming the hedge. Mrs. Kearns from across the street wandered over, watering can in hand. Oh, I saw Scarlett yesterday, she said lightly. At Avenue Cafe. She was sitting with a man. They seemed close. You know him? I froze for a moment, the hedge clippers in midair. No, I said too casually. Must be a colleague. Mrs. Kearns nodded and wandered off. I stood there for a long moment, watching her disappear around the corner. That night, Scarlett was back to her routine. Phone face down, her smile just a little too practiced. The ring was back on her finger. She moved around the house as if nothing had changed. But I felt it. A growing tension, a gap between us that used to be filled with shared glances and quiet understanding. Now there was only silence, and a weight I couldn't explain. For now, I stayed quiet. But I was watching. It was the way Scarlett's gym bag stayed by the door for days, unopened. The way she started using a new password on her phone, one she'd never bothered with before. I told myself it was paranoia, the shadows of doubt clawing at me. But the nagging pull at the edge of my thoughts wouldn't fade. Late one evening, after she'd gone to bed claiming a headache, I found myself alone in the kitchen. The air was thick with the scent of her perfume, the bottle left half open on the counter. I stood there, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the weight of silence pressing down on me. My gaze drifted to her purse on the chair, the same bag she carried everywhere, the one she never let out of sight anymore. I didn't plan to go through it. Not at first. But my hands moved before I could think, the smooth leather cool against my palms. I unzipped the main compartment, expecting the usual clutter, receipts, a wallet, a half-used pack of gum. Instead, I found a small envelope tucked deep inside. My name was on the front, in her handwriting. I sat down at the table and slid the letter out. Inside were printed receipts, not from any store we frequented. Hotel bookings, dinner reservations, for dates that coincided with the evenings she claimed to be at board meetings or working late. The names were there, hers, and one that made my pulse hammer against my ribs. James Smith, the same man who owned that little cafe on Avenue Street. The one I'd entertained clients with once or twice, the one I thought was a casual acquaintance at most. I let the papers fall onto the table. My hand hovered there for a moment, trembling before I pulled out my phone. For a long minute, I just stared at the black screen, my reflection warped and hollow. Then I unlocked it and scrolled through our shared cloud storage, something we'd both forgotten about. Maybe. The automatic backups were still enabled. There they were. Photos, texts, messages she'd deleted from her phone, but never from the cloud. Images of her and James at that cafe, their heads close together. A blurry shot of them laughing over drinks. A selfie of her with him outside a hotel, both smiling. The texts were worse. Whispered promises, casual endearments she used to reserve for me. Plans to meet, excuses concocted to explain her absences. Reading them, the quiet weight inside me shifted into something jagged. I felt it pressing against my ribs, a hollow ache that was somehow sharp and cold at the same time. I sat there, the glow of the screen washing over me, my breath steady but shallow. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the woman I knew with the one in those messages. It didn't fit. It couldn't. But the evidence was there, undeniable and unkind. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the sting behind my eyelids. When I opened them again, the kitchen felt colder, the house unfamiliar. The laughter we used to share echoed faintly in the back of my mind, a ghost I couldn't quite summon. I thought about confronting her right then, waking her with the phone in my hand, demanding an explanation. But the impulse faded as quickly as it came. Instead, I sat in the silence, listening to the house settle around me. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Upstairs, she shifted in her sleep, oblivious. That's when I knew. And it changed everything. The next morning, I made coffee like always. I placed her cup on the counter, just the way she liked it, milk first, then coffee, no sugar. The house was quiet except for the soft clink of the spoon against the mug. Scarlett came down in her robe, her hair still damp from the shower, her phone clutched tight in one hand. She paused in the doorway, surprised to see me up early. "You're up already?" she said, trying to sound casual. I nodded, gesturing toward the coffee. "Made you some." She hesitated, then crossed the kitchen and took the mug. Her lips brushed the rim as she sipped, her other hand still gripping the phone. I watched her closely, noting how her eyes flicked away, how the lines around her mouth tightened. "Scarlett," I said quietly. She froze mid-sip. "Yes." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded receipts. I set them on the counter between us. "I found these." For a heartbeat, her expression didn't change. Then she slowly lowered the cup, the ceramic making a faint, hollow sound against the countertop. She glanced down at the papers, her brows knitting as if she might pretend not to recognize them. But her voice faltered. "Where did you—" I didn't let her finish. "They're yours," I said evenly. "You left them in your purse. The dates match the nights you said you were working late. And then there are the texts." I pulled out my phone, opened the screen, and laid it face up beside the receipts. The images of her and James stared up at us, bright and damning. For a moment, she stood perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on the counter's edge. Then, slowly, her shoulders sagged. "Jonathan, I can explain." "No," I said, my voice low but hard. "Don't." I felt the words hanging in the air, heavy and final. My hands were steady on the edge of the counter, but inside, something cracked, a quiet shattering that I wasn't sure could be repaired. My heart didn't race. There was no surge of anger, just a hollow, numbing weight. She let out a shaky breath. I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened. I didn't know how to stop it. I stared at her, seeing the woman I thought I knew, the one I built a life with. And now I saw someone else entirely, a stranger wrapped in the skin of my wife. "You lied," I said softly. "You made me feel like I was the one pulling away, the one not paying attention. But you were already gone." She flinched as though I'd struck her. "I was scared," she whispered. "Scared of what our life had become. Of how we were just going through the motions. And James made you feel what? Important." My voice was sharp, not with rage, but with cold clarity. Her lips trembled. "He made me feel seen." The weight of her words settled like dust over everything. Over the kitchen counter, over the half-sipped coffee, over the years we'd spent building this life. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone, to shatter something, anything, but I didn't move. I stood there, gripping the counter, my knuckles pale. "I thought we were solid," I said, my voice low and raw. "I thought after everything, we were still us." Her eyes glistened with tears. She reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. The distance between us felt like a chasm. "Jonathan, please," she murmured, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I almost laughed, the sound bitter and humorless. "But you did," I said. "You didn't think I'd notice, didn't think I'd care enough to see through the lies. You didn't think it would matter." Silence stretched between us. The ticking clock on the wall marked the moments as they slipped by. Finally, she spoke, her voice small. "What happens now?" I met her gaze, the weight of lie pressing against my ribs. "I don't know," I said honestly. I just know it can't go back to what it was. She let out a soft, broken sound, her shoulders shaking. But I couldn't comfort her. Not this time. I turned and left the kitchen, the weight of her presence heavy behind me. I climbed the stairs and closed the bedroom door behind me, leaving her alone with her guilt, her coffee, and the evidence of what she'd done. That's when I knew it was over. Not the marriage, not officially. Those papers hadn't been signed. But the trust, the core of everything we'd built, had collapsed. It wasn't rage or sadness. It was something quieter, deeper. A recognition that what I thought we shared had never truly existed the way I imagined. That's when I knew. And it changed everything. The house felt different. After that morning, Scarlett moved quietly through the rooms. I heard her in the kitchen, the muffled clatter of dishes, the muted hum of her phone vibrating. She kept her head down, her footsteps soft, as if silence could erase the past days. But I didn't join her. I stayed upstairs, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the muted light filtering through the blinds. That night, I lay in the guest room, listening to the faint creaks of the house settling. The bed was too soft, too unfamiliar. I heard her door click shut down the hall, her footsteps fading. The silence pressed in. Sleep felt impossible. I stood by the window, looking out at the street, the distant glow of the streetlights. Across the road, Mrs. Kern's porch light flickered once and went out. The world outside looked unchanged, ordinary. But inside, everything had shifted. The next morning, I moved through the house like a shadow. I brewed coffee, but let it go cold. I sat at the table while Scarlett set down a plate, scrambled eggs, toast, arranged neatly. I didn't touch it. She sat across from me, her fork idle. Neither of us spoke. The quiet between us was thick, brittle. In the afternoons, I found myself standing in doorways, looking into empty rooms. The living room where we used to watch movies, the study where she worked, the faint scent of her perfume still hanging in the air. Once, I paused at our bedroom door, listening to the muffled sound of her moving inside. I didn't knock. I turned and walked away, footsteps muffled on the hallway rug. The phone rang once, twice, then fell silent. I didn't answer. Messages piled up, some from Willow, a few from colleagues, one from a number I didn't recognize but suspected. I deleted them all without reading. That night, sleep was a shallow, broken thing. I woke before dawn, disoriented, my pulse heavy. I found myself in the kitchen, standing at the window, watching the sky lighten. The moon hung low over the rooftops. Inside, everything was quiet except for the ticking of the clock. Scarlett left her ring on the nightstand again. I saw it there the next morning, gleaming faintly in the weak light. I didn't touch it. It sat there, a quiet accusation, or maybe a surrender. I stood for a long moment, staring at it, my hands resting at my sides. The days blurred. I answered only necessary emails. I declined calls. I walked the yard in the late afternoon, watching the sun settle over the grass. Mrs. Kearns waved from her porch once, but I only nodded before turning back inside. Scarlett moved around me, careful, tentative. Her voice, when it came, was low, apologetic, like she wasn't sure she had the right to speak. Once, I heard her behind a closed door, her voice strained, low, words indistinct. I didn't ask who she was calling. I didn't need to. I sat at the edge of the guest room bed that night, staring at the faint pattern of light on the floor. My breath was slow. My hands were still. I realized I hadn't made a decision, not really. I was in a space between what was and what might be, waiting. The quiet was heavy, the walls close. I wasn't ready to leave, but I wasn't ready to stay either. So I just sat there, listening to the silence, waiting for it to tell me what to do next. I didn't plan to ask her, but on the third night, when she lingered in the hallway outside the guest room, something shifted. The sound of her breath, soft and uncertain, filtered through the cracked door. I found myself speaking before I even looked up. Why, Scarlett? There was a long pause, and then she stepped inside, arms wrapped tightly around herself, her posture small. She leaned against the doorframe like she needed it to hold her up. I don't know, she said softly. I turned to face her, the lamp casting a faint glow against her pale face. That's not an answer. She swallowed, her hands tightening on her arms. I was lonely. We were just there, but not together. I felt invisible. And then James, he made me feel, I don't know, valued. I stared at her, taking in the words. They didn't land the way I expected. Not with anger or disgust. Just a quiet, heavy weight. So you needed someone else to remind you existed? Her lips trembled. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. It wasn't about love. It was just something to fill the space, to feel connected, to feel important. I let the silence stretch, the air between us thick with the echoes of her confession. She wasn't trying to justify herself. Her words were halting, unsure, like she didn't fully understand them either. I thought we were okay, I said, my voice low. I thought this was just life, the way it settles in after years. I didn't realize you were drowning in it. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't even know I was. Not until it was too late. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the distant ticking of the hallway clock. It all felt far away, unreal. The next day, I called Ron, my oldest friend, someone who'd known Scarlett and me from the beginning. I met him for lunch at a quiet spot near the office, a place with booths that gave us privacy. He listened as I laid it all out, the missed cues, the half-truths I'd ignored, the quiet distance I'd convinced myself was temporary. She said she felt invisible, I murmured, stirring the untouched coffee in front of me. That I made her feel like she didn't exist. Ron leaned back, his arms crossed, his expression thoughtful. Did you? I looked away, the question sharp and unexpected. I thought I was being solid, reliable. Solid's not always enough, he said quietly. Sometimes it reads as absent, like you're there, but not really. I let the words settle, thinking of the dinners where I'd half listened, the nights when work had kept me late, the times I'd fallen asleep with my phone still in hand. Moments I hadn't thought much of. Until now. I should have noticed, I murmured. Ron sighed. That's hindsight talking. You trusted her. That's not a failure. I nodded slowly, but the truth twisted inside me. It wasn't about blame. Not fully. But it was about understanding how we'd gotten here. How we'd let the space between us grow wide enough for someone else to step in. That night, I sat alone in the guest room, the house still around me. I looked back, sifting through old memories, vacations, quiet Sunday mornings, the first years with Willow. I remembered her laugh, the way her hand used to slip into mine without a thought. When had that stopped? When had we stopped seeing each other? I realized I'd been asking the wrong questions. It didn't matter why, not really. The reasons were tangled and messy, full of half-truths and silent resentments. But one truth was clear. It happened. And now, I had to decide what came next. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the sun barely presses through the blinds, and the house feels like it's still holding its breath. Scarlett sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee cupped in her hands, her shoulders hunched forward as if bracing against an invisible weight. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment. The silence between us wasn't new anymore. It was just there, thick and expected. I can't keep doing this, I said quietly. Her head lifted slightly, her lips parting, but no words came. The light caught the edge of her face, highlighting the faint lines that worry and guilt had etched there. She looked older, more fragile, but I didn't feel sympathy. Not really. Just a tired understanding that whatever we'd been was no longer enough. I'm not angry, I added, the words sounding foreign even to me. I'm not here to punish you. But I can't pretend we're okay. Scarlett's hands tightened around the mug. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I thought maybe we could work through it. I let out a slow breath and stepped into the room. I pulled out a chair, but I didn't sit. I don't know how to do that, I said. I don't know how to sit across from you and pretend we're building something solid when I can't look at you without seeing everything that's broken. She closed her eyes, her shoulders trembling. I didn't mean to destroy us. I know, I said, my voice steady but heavy. But you did. And even if you didn't mean to, the damage is there. I leaned against the counter, staring at the pale sunlight slanting across the floor. I don't want to drag this out, Scarlett. I'm not going to turn this into a war. But I also can't stay here like this. She opened her eyes, and for the first time in days, she met my gaze directly. There was no defiance in her face, no pleading. Just a weary resignation. What do you want me to do? I shook my head, the answer already formed, though it hurt to say it. I think you should move out. Take some time. Stay with Willow or find somewhere else. This house, it's too full of everything we were supposed to be. I need space to think. And I think you do too. Her lips trembled. She set the mug down carefully, the sound of ceramic on wood sharp in the quiet. You're sure? I nodded. I'm sure. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she pushed back her chair and stood, her hands loose at her sides. I'll pack some things, she said softly. I watched her leave the room, the faint sound of her footsteps fading into the distance. I stood there, alone, listening to the tick of the clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator. The house felt even quieter now, like it was waiting for something that wouldn't come. She left that afternoon, a small suitcase in hand, her head lowered. No goodbye, no promises. Just a quiet exit through the front door. I watched from the window as she stepped into the waiting car and pulled away. No dramatic scene, no pleading words. Just silence. I stood in the doorway for a long time after the car disappeared from view. The house settled around me, the air still and heavy. I walked into the kitchen and sat at the table where she'd left her mug, the coffee now cold and untouched. I wrapped my hands around it, feeling the chill seep into my skin. For the first time in days, I felt something shift. Not relief, not closure, just the clarity that comes when there's nothing left to hold on to. No more pretending. No more waiting. It was over. And this time, it wasn't a question of what she did or why. It was a decision. Mine. After Scarlett left, the house fell into an uneasy stillness. Her absence wasn't loud. It was a quiet removal, the faint scent of her perfume fading from the bedroom, the toothbrush left behind by the sink. The closet, half empty, hung heavy with clothes she hadn't taken. I left it all untouched for weeks. I moved through the motions, packed her things into boxes, labeled them plainly books, clothes, miscellaneous. I stacked them neatly by the front door. She came back once, eyes lowered, to pick them up. We didn't speak. I held the door open. She nodded once, a small, tight gesture. Then she was gone. I called the locksmith the next day. Work was a blur of meetings and obligations. I didn't tell anyone, not really. The few friends who noticed my distracted silence offered vague sympathy, but I wasn't looking for consolation. I just needed space to think, to process, to breathe. Therapy came later. At first, I resisted. I sat in the stiff chair across from a woman with kind eyes who asked me how I was feeling, and I answered with silence. It felt ridiculous to talk about things I couldn't change. But eventually, the words came. I talked about Scarlett's distance, about my own silence, about the years of quiet resignation that had hollowed out our marriage long before James ever entered the picture. I didn't speak about revenge. There was none. Just a slow understanding that some things fracture because we let them, whether we realize it or not. I adjusted to the quiet of the house. Cooked simple meals. Rearranged the furniture. Cleared out the photos from the hallway. I started waking early, walking the neighborhood before the city stirred. The world outside moved forward, neighbors walking dogs, the scent of cut grass in the air. Life went on, indifferent. Willow reached out once. A brief text. "Dad," I heard. "Are you okay?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, "I'm fine." It wasn't the full truth, but it was enough for now. Scarlett's name stopped appearing in my inbox. The house felt less like a shared space and more like mine. Some nights, I'd catch myself listening for her footsteps on the stairs, the faint click of her closing the door. But the silence held. Over time, I stopped expecting it to break. Months passed. The legal paperwork was straightforward. Dividing assets, clarifying arrangements. We were both practical. There were no fights, no bitter disputes. Just a signature at the bottom of the page. One day, I stood in the backyard, watching the wind move through the trees, and realized I was breathing easier. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. It was something simpler, peace. A quiet knowing that I'd stepped through the worst of it and come out the other side, bruised but standing. I've learned not to underestimate silence. It holds truths we ignore, warnings we choose not to hear. Looking back, I see the gaps that opened between us long before Scarlett's confession, the missed dinners, the tired excuses, the way we both let life sweep us along, believing that momentum was the same as connection. I've stopped waiting for closure. It doesn't come with a perfect explanation or a grand realization. It's smaller than that. It's waking up one morning and noticing the weight on your chest is lifted, even if just a little. I'm not broken. I'm not bitter. I'm just here, living. And for the first time in a long time, I'm enough.